When I began the Stalker games on Switch, I decided to review them separately because I didn't know what I was getting into, and I'm kinda glad that I did. As I trekked into the second entry, not only did I find many different things, but it also felt like a different kind of experience, just with how you tackle the world. But let's dive into it. Here is my review of Stalker Clear Sky for the Nintendo Switch. Plot-wise, Clear Sky takes place just a bit before Shadow of Chornobyl and actually has its ending lead right into the opening of the original game. You play as Scar, a mercenary that miraculously survives a powerful emission in the zone, recovered by the Clear Sky faction, a group of scientists trying to study and understand the zone. After helping Clear Sky reclaim their territory, Scar ventures out to find a stalker named Strelok and find some answers to his mission from before the emission happened. As a story, I think it's pretty good here. Its plot doesn't hit quite as hard as Shadow did, but it's highly elevated if you played Shadow of Chornobyl before this game. There are a lot of familiar faces and locations, and one thing this game does a lot better than Shadow is dealing with the various factions of the zone. What I mean by this is that you actually get to spend time with the factions during the main story. While the Clear Sky faction is new, you have to work with the Stalkers, Duty, and Freedom in the main story. And that's what I really like about the story of this game. I mean, the main plot was fine, but whenever you ran into a faction, I really liked all of the story development that they gave you for all of the characters. Like when you meet Freedom for the first time, or when you basically set up the way the world is in the first game. Like going through the army warehouse base with a small task force from Freedom, essentially you creating why they are stationed in the army warehouses during the events of Shadow of Chornobyl. When it comes to gameplay, this is a first-person shooter with survival and faction elements. As you trek through it, you'll be exploring the zone and surviving with bandages, health kits, and radiation protection. Now with main progression, it isn't all that different from Shadow. While you do have to spend a while at the beginning helping Clear Sky establish the swamps as their base of operations, once you gain access to the world, you basically have the same map to explore as the first game, just with a lot of location changes and a few extra locations that weren't there in the original. What you do here is mostly the same as well. You can loot bodies, collect food, radiation pills, and med kits for healing and maintaining rads. You visit towns with NPCs you can barter with or do side quests for, and you gun down lots and lots of enemies and mutants. Most of the changes here are quality of life and in the form of upgrades. Mechanically, the bleed mechanic happens significantly more often when you get hit by basically anything. Bandages can fix bleeding, but they no longer replenish health like they did before. Bleeding happens so often that you have to have a surplus of bandages at all times just to survive from one area to the next. Artifacts are also more difficult to find, you needing a radar and little bolts that you throw into an anomaly to activate it and safely retrieve the artifact. Now let's go into the new features, starting with upgrades. Everything can be repaired from an upgrade NPC in the various towns and settlements. Weapons, armor, you name it. This means that you never have to replace armor with those absurdly expensive suits the NPCs sell. You can also greatly upgrade any weapon, not just by adding scopes, but enhancing stats like accuracy, recoil, and damage. Clear Sky also introduced a method of fast travel. Whenever you run into one of the factions, you can find a guide NPC. They can lead you to any territory under their control, but you do have to pay to travel there. It can get expensive, so a lot of the time I found myself just sticking to normal walking so I could save up that money for bandages and upgrades. But that leads us into the faction system, the biggest new mechanic of this game. Most locations like the depot and the garbage can be occupied by nearby factions. You'll continually get little notifications as you explore of a location being attacked, and you can go and help defend them to keep your preferred faction in control. This can help add fast travel options, though it does get a bit unrealistic at certain points of the story. For example, if you're traversing the army warehouses and you get a request from the depot all the way back at the garbage, odds are even if you ran all the way back there, the battle would be over before you could even attempt to help. There are some other new mechanics as well, like a day and night cycle, which does wonders in how much better the game looks, though there isn't really that much use for it in the story. It just happens naturally no matter what you're doing, and the night cycle unfortunately cannot be sped through. If you're having trouble seeing when you're wandering around places like the Red Forest, you just have to wait for the sun to come back up manually. The rest of the game is still good, sometimes even better than Shadow of Chornobyl. The RNG aiming system is still here, where weapons have accuracy stats and crouching improves the chance of hitting opponents, with every weapon having a spread like a shotgun. While I did hear that Clear Sky was the worst with this mechanic, I found it to be more accurate for the most part. Perhaps that's just because Clear Sky gives you access to good weapons much earlier. I managed to get scoped rifles within the game's first few hours, but even early on when trying to snipe bandits with the pistol, it just seemed more accurate. Either it was better or I just understood the mechanics after playing through all of Shadow of Chornobyl. Though despite this, I felt that Clear Sky was the more difficult game. This was mostly due to the bleeding effect I mentioned earlier. While you can find artifacts through RNG to help with the bleeding, it happens constantly. You get hit, hide, bandage, get 1 or 2 shots in, get hit again, and you're bleeding again. Even small firefights can easily drain you of half a dozen or more bandages, and since you're also using your money on repairs, upgrades, and fast travel, you won't have a whole lot of money to spend. Now let's talk about my main dislike about this game, the finale. For reference, Shadow of Chornobyl had its final areas turn into a linear shooting area instead of an open world one that created difficulty that almost required high-tier weapons like the Vintar BC sniper rifle. Clear Sky does that too, in its final 3 areas. While you are much better off in this game when you get to these levels, the game stops being an open world game and basically just turns into a linear Call of Duty military shooter. Everything can almost instantly kill you, and you almost have to save scum every room or corner to get anywhere. It's an interesting change, and if it were just the final area, it wouldn't feel so odd. But it was 3 different environments, one of which was an outdoor location. Now speaking of the finale, there's a lot of content and length here. Like with Shadow, I did the occasional side quest here and there, and I got through the game after playing for almost 25 hours, significantly longer than it took me to beat Shadow of Chornobyl. Next up is presentation, which is good. It looks mostly the same as the first game, though the cloud and sky details do have a noticeable difference once the day and night cycle hits. All in all, it seems to be mostly lighting that makes it look different from game to game. Moving on to performance, there actually are differences here. In Shadow of Chornobyl, the frame drops didn't really happen until you reached bar a good third of the way through the game. In Clear Sky, the frame drops happen almost immediately at the very beginning of the game when you're trekking through the swamps. The drops mostly aren't bad, but a couple select areas around the Red Forest have significantly larger frame drops for a couple seconds, really tanking the FPS. Thankfully, this only happened a few times, but they're extremely noticeable. But on a more positive note, despite Clear Sky having a reputation for being buggy, I didn't encounter any glitches or problems in my playthrough. Pretty much everything worked as intended outside of some delay in the Clear Sky faction people moving to locations in the swamp towards the beginning. Now let's go into battery life, which is the same as it was in Shadow of Chornobyl. Clear Sky gives the original and light models a range of about 3 to 5 hours, and the V2 and OLED models get 6 to 8 hours. In conclusion, Clear Sky is an interesting prequel to the Stalker series. Now, the downside, there are more frame drops here than in Shadow, the ending 3 levels turn into a linear military shooter, and the bleeding mechanic has been enhanced to an excessive degree. It's still a good game, and I found a lot of enjoyment in how it fleshed out the factions and how you create the zone situation in the first game, but it's kinda easy for you to see why people like this one the least. Reviews to Go rates Stalker Clear Sky for the Nintendo Switch a 7 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.